Ever drive past like a skyscraper, under construction and wonder like how do they even know that whole thing's not going to just sink into the ground?
Or like a tunnel. Yeah, yeah.
Those massive tunnel projects you see on the news sometimes, I always think, what's keeping that from just becoming a cave-in?
Right.
It's kind of crazy.
It's amazing what they can build.
It is.
Yeah.
And a lot of it comes down to, what's going on beneath the surface,
Yeah.
right? Which is why today we're going deep, pun very much intended, into the world of
The
geotechnicians.
detectives of dirt and rock.
Exactly. They're the ones figuring that stuff out so the rest of us can just, enjoy the view from our skyscrapers without worrying.
And what's fascinating is it really is like detective work.
Mm-hmm.
People think it's just digging a hole and saying, yep, there's dirt down there. But it's so much more than that.
Yeah. Right, right. So to help us with this deep dive, we're pulling from RoleCatcher's career guide on becoming a geotechnician. It was just updated in December 2023, so it's got all the latest info.
Fresh off the press.
Okay, so let's unpack this. What do geotechnicians actually do? All day, I mean.
Well, their day-to-day can actually be pretty diverse. But at its core, they're collecting rock and soil samples. But this isn't just grabbing a shovel and digging a random hole.
Oh, okay.
There's a lot of strategy involved. They have to analyze the area, pinpoint the most strategic spots to take those samples from.
And they're like scientists.
Exactly. Think of it like this. A doctor wouldn't just take your temperature and declare you healthy, right?
True.
They need a more complete picture. So, similarly, geotechnicians need a comprehensive understanding of the ground conditions.
Makes sense. And speaking of a complete picture, the guide mentions they pay super close attention to the structure, discontinuities, color, and weathering patterns of the soil and rock. Like, what can they tell from those details, it seems like? Super specific.
It is, but it's crucial info.
Mm-hmm.
These characteristics can reveal a lot about the ground's history, its stability, and potential weaknesses. For example, the color of the soil could actually tell you about the presence of certain minerals.
Oh, interesting.
Some minerals are going to make the soil stronger, more stable, and others, not so much.
It's like hidden clues.
Yes.
And I'm guessing discontinuity is a fancy word for, like, cracks and stuff.
Bingo. A discontinuity could be anything from a tiny fracture in a rock to a large fault line running through the site. Each discontinuity tells a story about the forces that have acted on the ground over time.
So they can kind of tell how it might behave in the future.
Exactly. Especially under the weight of, a building or a road.
So all these tiny details, the color of the dirt, little cracks in a rock, that can make or break a multi-million-dollar project.
Absolutely. In fact, I actually remember a project where a geotechnician's analysis of rock cores, these are long cylindrical samples of rock extracted from deep underground, well, they revealed a previously undetected fault line. If they hadn't caught that, it could have been disastrous.
Wow. Talk about a high-stakes job.
No kidding.
And speaking of the job, it sounds like it's not all lab coats and safety goggles, right? I mean, the RoleCatcher guide mentions some pretty adventurous work environments.
It's true.
Like, yeah, there's labs and offices, but also mines, drilling rigs, even remote locations.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that actually often surprises people about this field is the variety. One day you might be in a high-tech lab, analyzing soil samples under a microscope, and the next you're out on a drilling rig overseeing the extraction of those rock cores we were talking about.
So not your typical desk job.
Definitely not.
Some of those environments, like you think about like a mine that could be pretty demanding, right?
Yeah.
Maybe even dangerous.
Yeah, there are definitely some inherent risks, just like any job that involves being out in the field, working with heavy machinery, sometimes at heights. But the guide really highlights how seriously the industry takes safety. Like there's a lot of training involved and very strict regulations on these job sites.
Yeah, I'd imagine because you don't want like one little mistake to turn into like a massive problem.
Yeah.
So these geotechnicians, they get to like combine science with a little bit of adventure.
It's a good mix.
Sounds kind of cool, actually.
And you have to be able to think critically, solve problems, which actually, speaking of that, that's a perfect segue to the next thing I wanted to bring up from the RoleCatcher guide.
Okay, yeah.
It goes into the skills that you actually need to succeed as a geotechnician.
Okay, so obviously you're going to need like a deep understanding of geology, maybe some chemistry thrown in there.
Yep.
What else?
The guide actually specifically lists geology, chemistry, and physics. You've got to have those foundational knowledge bases there. But then it gets interesting.
Okay.
Because they also emphasize reading, comprehension, mathematics, and get this computer skills.
Computer skill for rocks. Like, what are we talking? Are you building websites about rocks now?
Not quite. Although, you saying that actually just reminded me of that, what was that website? That Geology Rocks website. Someone made that, like, back in the day.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, not quite website design, but technology is seriously changing the game in this field. Geotechnicians now, they use all this specialized software for data analysis, 3D visualizations. You can take like a virtual tour under the ground, under a construction site.
Oh.
It's crazy. And then even modeling, like to try to predict how the ground might behave in different situations and conditions.
So they're really on the cutting edge. That's pretty cool.
It's really cool.
Okay, so you've got the science part down. You're comfortable with the, high-tech tools. What else makes a geotechnician really stand out? I would have to guess that communication is a big one because they have to explain all this really complex stuff to the engineers, right? Make sure everyone's on the same page.
You're absolutely right. The guide actually, they specifically highlight that geotechnicians, they act as this bridge between the raw data, the hard science, and then the people who need to actually use that information to make decisions. So the engineers, architects, project managers, you name it.
So you've basically got to be able to explain a fractured shale formation, like to someone like me.
Exactly, exactly. And that takes really strong written and verbal communication skills. Plus, they're often working in teams, so being able to collaborate, solve problems together, adapt to different personalities and work styles, it's all essential.
Okay, so it's like a mix of brains, tech savviness, people skills.
Yeah.
I'm starting to see why this is actually kind of an interesting career path.
Mm-hmm.
But what does that path even look like? Like, do you start as, like, junior rock identifier and work your way up to chief soil supervisor?
Not quite those titles, although I kind of wish those were real titles.
Right.
But the RoleCatcher guide does outline like a career progression. It starts with an entry-level geotechnician, and then it can move all the way up to the coveted senior geotechnician role.
So there's definitely room for growth.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
what kind of things change as you climb that ladder?
So at the entry level, you're mostly assisting more experienced geotechnicians, learning the ropes, getting your hands dirty, literally, with sample collection and testing, stuff like that.
Makes sense.
But as you gain experience and knowledge, you take on more responsibility. You might start leading smaller projects, maybe even mentoring some of the newer team members. And then eventually, you could be overseeing huge projects, providing expert advice, making decisions that could impact, not just the success of a project, but also its safety, its budget. It's a lot of responsibility.
Yeah, big stuff. So there's, like, a leadership component to it too, if that's something that you're looking for, which it sounds like a theme here is lifelong learning is kind of key in this field, right?
100%. That's something that the guide really emphasizes over and over again, is how crucial it is for geotechnicians to be constantly learning. New technologies, regulations change, and the field itself is always evolving.
So for anyone listening who considers themselves a learner, always wants to be picking up new skills, new knowledge, this field really sounds like it could scratch that itch.
Yeah, totally.
But let's get practical for a second. How does someone actually get into this line of work? Like, are we talking like a very specific corner of the job boards?
You'll definitely want to look for geotech-specific postings, but the advice RoleCatcher gives in the guide, it's actually really solid for any job search.
Yeah.
For instance, they talk a lot about tailoring your CV.
Oh, okay.
Making sure you're highlighting the skills and experience that are most relevant to each role or company that you're applying to.
Right.
It's not just a one-size-fits-all kind of thing.
Right. So if you happen to have done a project, even in school, something academic that involved soil analysis or any kind of testing, you'd want to put that front and center.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Employers, they want to see that you can take what you've learned in the classroom or maybe in a previous role and actually apply it, real-world situations.
Show, don't tell, basically.
Exactly.
And speaking of connections, because it's not always just about what you know, the guide also mentions networking. What's their take on that?
Yeah, and it's not just about, schmoozing at industry events,
Right.
although those could be helpful. But RoleCatcher specifically points to organizations like the International Association of Oil and Gas Producers, there's the National Mining Association, even the Society of Petroleum Engineers. These are all great places to connect with people in the field.
Because sometimes it's who you know, right?
It's more like who can vouch for what you know. Like even just having an informational interview with someone who's a little further along in their geotechnical career, that can give you really valuable insight.
Oh, for sure.
Maybe even open some doors to opportunities that you didn't even know existed.
That's always good.
Yeah.
And speaking of opportunities, let's talk money for a second.
Everyone wants to know.
Right. Does a career in geotechnics mean that you're on track to, own a mansion one day, but like a mansion built on the most stable bedrock that money can buy.
Maybe not a mansion, but a solid foundation is definitely within reach.
Hmm.
The guide actually, they mentioned a salary range of $40,000 to $70,000 per year on average.
Okay.
But that's just the baseline. And remember how we were talking about the importance of, experience, specialization, leadership skills.
Yeah.
All those things can bump you up to the higher end, potentially even beyond.
Not bad. Not bad at all. So, not a bad gig if you love science, don't mind a little adventure. You actually want to be able to see the impact of your work on the world around you.
Totally. And you know what I think is so interesting about doing these deep dives is how many of the themes that we uncover actually apply, across the board to so many different fields.
Yeah.
Whether you're thinking about a career in geotechnics or something else entirely, that importance of clear communication, problem solving, continuous learning, like those are things that are going to serve you well no matter what you end up doing.
So true. It's like the more you learn, the more you realize there's even more to learn, which is, I guess, the beauty of it all.
Exactly.
So next time you're walking past a skyscraper, a bridge, even just like a road, I don't know, just take a second to think about that hidden world beneath your feet
Right.
and all the work that went into making sure that it's all standing strong.
It really makes you appreciate it.
It really does.
And if anyone out there is feeling inspired to learn more about all the cool stuff that geotechnicians do, definitely check out RoleCatcher's full guide. They've got way more details on the different career stages, sample interview questions if you're feeling ambitious, and just tons of resources to help you dig deeper.
Pun intended.
Maybe just a little.
Yeah.
But no, seriously, whether you're like actually considering a career shift or just kind of curious about the world around us, hopefully this deep dive has given you a new appreciation for the hidden world of geotechnics.
The detectives of dirt and rock.
Yeah.